If there's anything that bass fishermen can actually agree on, it's that the Texas rig is one of the most fish catching machines of all time. It catches big fish and it catches a lot of fish. And today I wanna show you the the top 5 Texas rigs that I have used to catch fish across the nation. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. If you guys have not heard of the Deep Dive app, this is an app that you can download on your phone. There's a free version and there's also a paid version. It really helps you as a bass fisherman to know exactly what lure you should be throwing and where you should be throwing it. Once you get out to the body of water that you are fishing, you can actually select that body of water. You can select the water temperature, the water clarity, whether that lake has vegetation or not, and whether you're fishing in a protected or windy area. Once you make those selections, the app is actually going to spit out some strategies and some lures that you can use to catch fish on your body of water right now. I'm going to leave a link down below in the description. If you guys want to download that app, click that link right now. With so many different soft plastics out there on the market, it can be very overwhelming for a bass fisherman to select what they think is going to work when it comes to fishing a Texas rig. Today, I want to give you 5 Texas rigs that I probably use 95% of the time. I'm going to give you the specific ones that I use, and I'm going to tell you where I like to throw these soft plastics, so hopefully it can simplify your Texas rig fishing. The first Texas rig that is one of my absolute favorites is the Missile Baits D-Bomb. Now the D-Bomb is kind of that beaver style bait, and this bait is my go-to bait whenever I am flipping and pitching cover, whether that's lily pads or reeds, or if I'm fishing it around docks or wood cover. Most of the time that I am fishing this bait, I'm fishing it on a 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce, with 3/8 probably being my favorite. And whether I select a 1/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce or a 3/8 really comes down to a number of different things. That could be water temperature, that could be the depth of the cover that I'm fishing, and sometimes it's just what the fish want. If you kind of get on a flipping and pitching bite, sometimes I like to experiment with weight sizes to see which one the bass actually like the most. Now the reason that I like the D-Bomb over some of the other beaver style baits is actually because of the ribs that are on this bait. The ribs kind of give this bait a little bit of a bigger presence in the water. So sometimes I feel like I can get a bigger bite with this bait. But the other thing about the ribs is that there's not a whole lot of plastic that is on this bait. And I really feel like I get a good hookup ratio with this soft plastic over some of the other beaver style baits. As far as color goes, I really keep things pretty simple. Usually it's some sort of dark color and some sort of natural color. So whether that's a black and blue or just a black neon color like I'm holding right here. And then my natural color is going to be something like green pumpkin blue flake, or watermelon. If I'm fishing on cloudy days or in muddy water, I'm typically going to use those darker baits, while if I'm fishing in clear water, I'm going to use that more natural colored bait. I personally like a straight shank hook with the D-Bomb. This is a 4-aught Trocar TK130 hook. All right, the next Texas rig is probably my favorite, although I feel like I've said that about every one of these, and that is the Zoom Old Monster worm. This is absolutely one of my favorite ways to catch a bass, is fishing this big worm, this Zoom Old Monster. It's a 10.5-inch worm. And anytime I am fishing kind of off the bank, whether I'm fishing around hydrilla that is offshore, or maybe it's a brush pile offshore, or a shell bottom or a rock bottom, I love dragging a Zoom Old Monster. I was actually using this exact setup several years ago fishing on Lake Chickamauga, where I got 4th place in a Bassmaster Open down there fishing this exact worm. This is actually my favorite color in the Zoom Old Monster, which is plum, but there's a lot of good colors. I like plum, I like green pumpkin, I like June bug. But anytime I'm kind of fishing off the bank, or anytime I'm fishing in the summertime, I pick up the Zoom Old Monster a lot. This is also a great bait to use in ponds during the summer as well. Now typically when I'm fishing the Zoom Old Monster, I like it on 15-pound fluorocarbon line, and the hook that I like to use with this bait is an offset worm hook. I believe this one here is an owner hook. The big thing when you're fishing a big worm like this is a lot of guys tend to want to put this hook way down here. And if you do that in your fishing, it just leads to a lot of frustration because you're gonna scrunch up the top of this worm. So you do not have to put a hook way down here. As you can see, I leave about a 1/2 inch and then I pop that hook out, and I hook up with fish even in Ohio where I'm fishing for like 1 pound fish a lot of times. So anytime you're fishing in the summer, anytime you're fishing offshore, do not forget about that Zoom Old Monster. The next Texas rig that I have caught a ton of fish on is the Zoom Speed Crawl. The Zoom Speed Crawl has been around for forever, and there's been thousands of bass caught on this bait. Now, something else that I really like about a Zoom Speed Crawl is I actually love it on a Carolina rig, and I also like it on the back of a jig as a jig trailer. So the Speed Crawl has multiple different purposes, but I absolutely love this bait when I am fishing a Texas rig. Now, specifically, something that I do a lot with the Zoom Speed Crawl is, as you can see here, I will flip the Zoom Speed Crawl with a big weight in matted vegetation. Across the country, whether you live up north in New York or down south in Florida, you're gonna have mats of vegetation in lakes, rivers, and ponds. I absolutely love targeting mats because a lot of times some of the biggest fish that are in the body of water that you are fishing are going to be up underneath of those mats. Now, you could flip a ton of different baits with a big weight like this, but the reason that I like the Zoom Speed Crawl is because if you pitch it in a mat, once it breaks through that mat and it goes to the bottom really quick, those little pinchers that are on the back of that bait, once it goes through the mat, are going to kick as they're going down to the bottom. And sometimes I think that that little kick coming through the mat actually can really attract a lot of fish, because if you think about it, underneath of a mat, it's typically pretty dark. Up underneath the mat, it's going to block out the sunlight, and you typically also have a dark bottom a lot of times in those situations. And so that little bit of thump as it falls through the mat, I think can sometimes help a bass hone in on that bait as it goes through the mat. Now, you could use other crawl baits that kick a little bit more, but the Zoom Speed Crawl, as you can see, it's a very compact bait. I mean, it doesn't have really big pinchers on it, so it gets through the mat very easily, where sometimes other baits can kind of hang up on the mat. Now, one thing that I have found to be really important about using this bait is actually to use a bit smaller of a hook than you would think. This is actually just a 3/0 Trocar TK130 hook that I have in this bait. Even if you're fishing down in Florida where you could catch an 8, 9, 10 pounder underneath of a mat, sometimes if you set the hook on a fish and you're using a really big hook like a 5/0 hook, that hook will come through the fish's mouth, but as you're bringing that fish out of the mat, that hook is actually going to get caught on grass because it has completely penetrated that fish's mouth. And sometimes if you get a fish hung up in the mat, that is when they get off. So I actually go with a smaller hook, that 3/0 hook, anytime I'm fishing the Speed Crawl with a big weight like this. Now, the next Texas rig I use a ton, and that Texas rig is a tube. Now, the reason that I use a tube so much is because my favorite place to fish a tube is anytime I am fishing around highly pressured bodies of water. Because I live in Ohio, we have a lot of smaller lakes and we have a ton of anglers. So most of the bodies of water that I fish are highly pressured. And I like to fish that tube for the simple reason that I think a lot of people don't pick up a tube anymore. And I'm gonna use this bait in a lot of the similar areas that I use that Missile Baits D-Bomb. Anytime I am flipping and pitching wood cover, cattails, lily pads, docks, whatever it may be, if I'm flipping and pitching cover, I'm going to pick up the tube. Now, if I'm fishing around vegetation, I will peg my weight like you have right here with this tube, but a lot of times, if I can get away with not pegging that weight, I will do that because I think the tube works way better when it is not pegged. Actually, I think for most of these soft plastics, except for maybe that really big weight with the Speed Crawl, I think if you don't peg your weight, you actually get a lot more bite. Now, besides flipping and pitching cover, another place that I fish this tube a lot is kind of when I am working a steeper bank. Maybe this is a creek channel swing bank or even a bluff bank. A lot of times this is a place where I'm going to throw like a football jig, but again, because I'm fishing around highly pressured bodies of water, that's where I'm going to pick up this tube and just work it like a jig. I'm going to cast it up shallow and I'm going to work it down really deep. deep. Now, when it comes to the tube that I like the most, it's actually this one here. This is the Strike King Coffee flipping tube. And the reason that I like it is it actually has a solid head on it. And that solid head just means you're not going to tear up as many tubes. The last, but certainly not least, when it comes to a Texas rig is some sort of soft stick bait like the Gary Yamamoto Cinco. This is a Texas rig that I'm going to throw when I literally cannot figure out how to catch a fish. Like, this is my go-to when I'm like, I can't figure them out. I don't know what to do. It's something that I just have a ton of confidence in. It doesn't have a ton of action down there under the water, but bass, as you guys probably know, absolutely love a Cinco style bait like the one that I have right here. Now, speaking of the Cinco, I actually did a video where I talked about things that you should actually stop doing with a Cinco, and I'm gonna link that right here. So if you guys wanna watch that video next, go ahead and click right there. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.